It happened on a quiet street in Waterbury, Connecticut. A house fire in the middle of the night. One man taken to the hospital. One woman in handcuffs. When I heard this wasn't just a fire, but an attempt to escape, I drove out there the next morning. What I saw inside that house, I won't forget. And the deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just a crime inside one home. It was a crime a whole town allowed to happen. The house was ordinary. Cream-colored siding, sun-warped window blinds, a mailbox barely hanging on. I pulled up the morning after the fire. A strip of yellow police tape still fluttered in the breeze. On the front steps, blackened soot. Above it, the faint smell of smoke clung to the February air. It looked like a typical electrical fire, maybe a forgotten space heater in the cold. But what happened inside that house, that was something no one on the street could have imagined. Or maybe they did, and chose not to. According to fire reports, the blaze started shortly after midnight. Flames tore through a second-floor bedroom. Firefighters arrived within minutes, forcing their way through a cluttered hallway to pull out two people. One was a 56-year-old woman named Kimberly Sullivan, the owner of the home. She called 911. The other was a man, dazed, coughing from smoke, barely able to stand. He was 32. He told EMTs something that froze them in place. I started the fire. I just wanted to be free. They rushed him to St. Mary's Hospital. At first, no one believed what he said. Fires can shake people up. But then came the second detail, the one that stopped the story from being just another house fire. He told doctors he hadn't left that house in over 20 years. The hospital flagged the case. By sunrise, the Waterbury Police Department launched an investigation. Detectives entered the house that afternoon. What they found confirmed the worst. A single bedroom, charred from fire damage, showed signs of something far more disturbing. The door had a lock on the outside. The windows were nailed shut. There were scratch marks along the bottom of the doorframe. The room itself was bare, no mattress, no light bulb in the ceiling. In one corner, a plastic bowl. In another, what looked like a security camera pointed down at the floor. And this wasn't an abandoned room. Someone had lived there recently. Someone had burned it from the inside. When I walked through the area the next morning, neighbors were out shoveling snow or sipping coffee on porches. They watched me but said nothing. One man across the street gave me a polite nod and went back inside. I stood there, facing that scorched second-floor window, wondering what 20 years of silence felt like, what it looked like, and how it could happen in the middle of a city, in a home with electricity, Wi-Fi, neighbors just feet away. Later that day, a detective briefed me under condition of anonymity. The man, Kimberly's stepson, had been locked in that room since he was 11. No schooling, no medical visits, no contact with the outside world. He weighed just over 68 pounds. For reference, I'm 6 feet tall. He was about 5'9" and looked like a child wearing the wrong skin. We thought he was going to die, the detective said. But he didn't. He survived. And now, for the first time in 2 decades, he was talking. The official charges against Kimberly Sullivan wouldn't come until later. But by that evening, the department had enough to detain her for questioning. The media hadn't caught on yet. There was no press at the house. No cameras. Just that one boarded window and the smell of something much darker than smoke. I stayed there until the sun dipped behind the rooftops. There are stories that start with violence, or blood, or mystery. This one started with fire. But the real horror had nothing to do with flames. I visited St. Mary's Hospital the next day, though I never saw him directly. Security was tight, not because of the usual media frenzy, but because staff didn't know who, if anyone, might still be tied to his past. The nurses whispered about him in the hallway. He doesn't talk much, one said. But when he does, it's hard to listen. What struck them first wasn't what he said, it was what he looked like. At 32 years old, the man had the body of someone half his age, and not in the way people mean when they say someone looks young. He looked underdeveloped, malnourished. His medical chart, later leaked through a source, listed his weight at 68 pounds. That's third percentile for an 8-year-old. He had no dental records, no immunization history, no government ID. His name, legally, still matched records from elementary school, Jacob Sullivan. Doctors noted bruising on his arms, old scars along his back and thighs, and signs of what they called chronic sensory deprivation. He flinched at bright lights. He was terrified of open doors. That stuck with me, terrified of open doors. He spoke only a few sentences during initial intake. But one sentence made it into the police report. She said I wasn't ready for the world. That the world would eat me alive. She was Kimberly Sullivan, Jacob's stepmother. She'd married his father sometime in the late 90s. The father died in 2004 from a reported stroke. After that, Kimberly kept Jacob and never let him go. According to investigators, Kimberly told social services that Jacob was being homeschooled. She filed the paperwork once, in 2005, and no one followed up. No home visits. No check-ins. As far as the state knew, Jacob was just another kid out of the system. In reality, he was a prisoner. When officers searched the Sullivan home, they found no school materials. No notebooks. No books. No computer in the room, not even a pencil. What they did find were 4 different locks installed over time on the outside of his door. The timeline was clear. As Jacob aged, the security around him intensified. Neighbors claimed they never saw him. One told police, "I thought maybe she had a nephew visiting once, but I don't know." Another admitted hearing thuds or soft banging at night, but assumed it was plumbing. The fire, Jacob's fire, had started with a pile of clothes lit in the corner. No accelerant. No gasoline. Just a spark in sheer desperation. He waited until Kimberly had gone to bed, then set it ablaze, knowing she'd call for help. He started the fire to be saved. Some people asked why he didn't run when firefighters came. The truth? He didn't know how. He wasn't just locked in a room. He was locked inside himself. I spoke with one of the EMTs who carried him out. Off the record, he said, "I've seen burn victims, overdose cases, abuse survivors. But this felt different." He looked like a man who just stepped out of the Stone Age. It was that raw. Jacob was moved to a psychiatric unit by the end of the week. The hospital wasn't equipped to handle what he needed, not just food and medicine, but the slow, painful introduction to a world he'd never known. The first meal he was given, according to a nurse's note, was a bowl of rice. He ate it with his hands, not because of trauma, because he didn't know how else to eat. What Kimberly had done wasn't just confinement. It was erasure. She erased his body, his voice, his place in the world. She turned a child into a shadow and managed to keep him hidden in plain sight for 20 years. And now, that shadow was starting to speak. It's easy to believe no one knew. That Kimberly Sullivan was just a master manipulator. That neighbors were fooled, schools were tricked, the system overwhelmed. It's easy, but it's not true. I started digging into the history of that house on Blake Street. Property records showed Kimberly had lived there since 2001. Her late husband was listed on the mortgage, Robert Sullivan, a postal worker. Jacob was his son from a previous relationship. After Robert died in 2004, Kimberly became Jacob's legal guardian. That's when everything stopped. School attendance records from the Waterbury district showed Jacob last enrolled in 6th grade, 2005. He was 11. Teachers remembered him quiet, often isolated, but polite. He'd once written a short essay about becoming a veterinarian. His final report card showed B's and C's. Then nothing. No formal withdrawal. No transfer. Just gone. The school flagged his absence. That much I confirmed with a former teacher, who asked not to be named. She told me the school counselor submitted a concern to the Department of Children and Families. That's standard protocol in Connecticut. But here's where things broke down. Kimberly responded with a claim that she was opting for home instruction due to special needs and safety concerns. She cited harassment from school staff and requested that all further contact be made through an attorney. DCF logged the case, reviewed it, and closed it. No home visit. No interview with Jacob. No follow-up. When I reached out to DCF, they issued a one-sentence statement. All appropriate protocols in place at the time were followed. I've read enough government statements to translate that. We didn't break the rules. But maybe the rules were never built for this. I found the former school counselor who filed the report. She's retired now. We sat down in a diner just outside town. Her hands trembled when she spoke about the case. I knew something was wrong, she said. He stopped showing up. Kimberly was evasive. The tone in her voice. I can still hear it. She paused, then added, "We were told to back off. That if we kept pushing, it might escalate." Escalate into what? I wanted to ask, but I already knew the answer. It escalated into silence. A silence that lasted 20 years. Then I turned to the neighborhood. I knocked on doors. Some didn't answer. Others peeked through blinds. Eventually, I found one neighbor, middle-aged, cautious, who spoke off the record. She was quiet. Not friendly, but not hostile. Kept to herself. We saw her put out trash, get groceries. Alone. Always alone. I asked if they'd ever seen a child in the house. A few times, back in the day. Maybe 15 years ago? I thought it was her nephew. He looked thin. Another neighbor remembered odd sounds, tapping, faint banging late at night. I assumed it was rats, she told me. No one called police. No one knocked on her door. No one checked. It would be comforting to say they were fooled, but most just didn't want to get involved. That's a different kind of cruelty, not active harm, but passive permission. One neighbor admitted she once considered calling social services. But I thought, what if I'm wrong? And then, what if I have to live next to her afterward? That's the logic that lets monsters build cages, brick by brick, lie by lie, in the middle of neighborhoods just like this one. This wasn't just Kimberly's secret. It was Waterbury's. And as I kept digging, I found something worse. Jacob's name hadn't been forgotten by everyone. In fact, someone had tried to help him once. And they'd been silenced, too. I've sat across from killers before, some cold, some broken, some who still believed they did nothing wrong. But I never met Kimberly Sullivan. I only got close through the trail she left behind. Her mugshot was the first image that circulated. No bruises, no tears, no remorse. Just a middle-aged woman with graying hair, clear eyes, and an expression so blank it bordered on defiant. That was the Kimberly the public met. But it wasn't the Kimberly her neighbors knew. And it definitely wasn't the Kimberly Jacob knew. She'd lived on Blake Street for over 2 decades. Most neighbors called her private, polite, not very social. She rarely had visitors. Never threw parties. Occasionally waved hello. A few described her as sad, especially after her husband died. She worked from home for a while, freelance bookkeeping, they said, but eventually seemed to stop altogether. To the outside world, Kimberly Sullivan was just another quiet widow. But inside that house, she had complete control over everything. The police found extensive notes in her bedroom. Some were journals. Others read like logs, detailed entries about Jacob's behavior, what he ate, when he slept, when he acted out. Some entries stretched back to 2008. Not once did she refer to him as a son. Instead, the boy, the subject, the problem. One page read, still resists light, claims it hurts his eyes, refuses structured prayer time, will not eat lentils, punished with silence. Punished with silence. That phrase haunted me more than anything else. There were also signs of how carefully she constructed the illusion. The house was always kept clean, at least the parts that guests might see. Deliveries were paid in cash. No one entered the second floor. She had blackout curtains in every room, including Jacob's, nailed shut from the outside. Police found remnants of a baby monitor system she'd used to listen in on him from the kitchen. Later, it had been upgraded to a closed-circuit camera. It fed into a monitor on her nightstand. She never gave him a phone, never let him outside. His world was that room, and she was the god of it. But here's where the story turns from cruel to deeply twisted. A psychological profile ordered by the court revealed Kimberly exhibited traits of delusional disorder, specifically, a belief that the world outside was inherently evil and that she alone was equipped to protect Jacob from it. In her mind, she hadn't imprisoned him. She'd saved him. She reportedly told police, he wasn't like other boys. He couldn't handle the world. I kept him safe. That was love. It's easy to label someone like that as a monster. But monsters don't always scream or wield knives. Sometimes they wear slippers, bake their own bread, and wave to you from across the street. Kimberly's personal history offered few clues. No prior arrests. No mental health flags. Her own childhood, a mystery. Born in New Jersey, bounced around a bit, married late. No close family. No children of her own. When Robert died, she withdrew not just socially, but structurally. She cut off the outside world like a tumor. What she did next, we may never fully understand. But the effect was total. Jacob wasn't just hidden. He was erased. Erased from school, from state records, from memory. A ghost with a heartbeat. And all the while, Kimberly smiled at neighbors, paid her taxes, waved at mailmen. No one suspected. Or maybe they did, and didn't want to know. By the time I finished reviewing the case files, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a story of abuse. It was a life designed around control, carried out slowly, quietly, for 20 years. But Kimberly hadn't fooled everyone. Years ago, someone had tried to raise the alarm. And that person still had the evidence. There's always a moment in stories like this, a single point where everything could have gone differently. Where someone raised their voice, and the system had a chance to listen. This time, that voice belonged to a teacher named Marian Fletcher. She taught 6th grade at Walsh Elementary in 2005. She remembered Jacob Sullivan, not as loud or rebellious, but withdrawn. A sweet kid with sad eyes, she told me. He kept his head down, finished his work, never caused problems. That's what made his sudden absence all the more suspicious. When Jacob stopped showing up, Marian asked questions. Kimberly responded with vague excuses, illness, a move, then finally, homeschooling. But the timeline felt off, and Jacob never said goodbye to anyone. So Marianne did what every good teacher should. She filed a formal concern with the Department of Children and Families. That was nearly 20 years ago. When I tracked her down, Marianne was retired, living 3 hours north. I expected a phone call. Instead, she invited me to her home, a modest ranch-style house with overgrown flower beds and books stacked 3 rows deep on every shelf. I knew one day someone would come asking, she said. I just didn't think it would take this long. She opened an old manila folder, labeled Jacob S. Inside were lesson plans, progress notes, and a copy of the original letter she sent to DCF. It was dated May 2005. I read it carefully. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't accusatory. It was precise. I am concerned about the sudden removal of Jacob Sullivan from school without proper transition or follow-up. Based on my interactions with his guardian, I believe he may be at risk of neglect or psychological harm. I respectfully request a home visit to ensure his well-being. It was clear, professional, and most importantly, it should have worked. But it didn't. DCF responded 3 weeks later with a 1-paragraph letter, thanking her for her concern and stating that no further action is required at this time. Marianne never heard from them again. I didn't know what else to do, she said. I didn't have power. I wasn't a cop or a judge. I was a school teacher. Her eyes welled up as she said it. That phrase, I didn't have power, stuck with me. I asked her why she kept the letter all these years. Because I knew I was right. And because if he ever got out, I wanted him to know someone noticed. In the end, Marianne had seen what others didn't. Or wouldn't. But the system didn't fail because of one bad call. It failed because no one was willing to push further. One letter should have led to a visit. One visit should have led to questions. One question could have opened a door. Instead, Jacob remained locked away for 20 more years. As I left her house that afternoon, Marianne handed me a copy of the letter. He might need it one day, she said. I kept it in my bag the entire drive back to Waterbury. Because when people ask how this happened, how no one knew, this letter is the answer. Someone did know. But knowing wasn't enough. I met Jacob only once. It was brief. A quiet visit, arranged through a clinician at the rehabilitation center where he was staying. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. You could see it in his posture, the way he held a paper cup with both hands like it might fall through his fingers. His eyes never quite settled in one place. And yet, he was there. Alive. A man still learning what that word meant. He was in a secure unit, but not because he posed a danger to others. The outside world was still too much. Doors made him anxious. Windows, worse. He'd never used a phone, never ridden in a car without panic. He didn't recognize most foods. He didn't understand jokes. He's not just healing from trauma, his doctor told me. He's learning how to exist. His diet had to be reintroduced slowly. He was severely anemic. His bones were underdeveloped from years of malnutrition. His skin reacted poorly to sunlight. He was undergoing intensive psychological therapy, but progress was measured in inches, not miles. What struck me most was how gentle he was. Not broken, just unsure. Like someone who'd stepped out of a dark room and didn't quite believe the light was real. I asked him if he remembered school. He nodded. I told him a teacher had saved the letter, the one that might have gotten him help. He said nothing. But when I handed him the photocopy, he stared at it for nearly a minute. Then he whispered, "She remembered me?" That was the only thing he said during our meeting. Kimberly Sullivan was formally charged with multiple counts of unlawful imprisonment, felony abuse, reckless endangerment, and intentional neglect. She pled not guilty. Her defense cited mental illness. The prosecution countered with 20 years of isolation, starvation, and psychological manipulation. Her trial is scheduled for late this year. But whatever the verdict, the damage is already done. No sentence can give Jacob back his youth. No ruling can undo what was taken. The legal system is designed to measure guilt, not grief. As the story spread, first across Connecticut, then nationally, people began asking how it happened. How someone could vanish for 20 years. How an entire neighborhood, an entire city, missed the signs. I've covered crimes in alleys, in woods, in motel rooms off the interstate. But this one shook me differently. Because it didn't happen in the dark. It happened in daylight. In a house with curtains. On a street with neighbors. This wasn't just about Kimberly. It was about everyone who looked the other way. Everyone who saw something, a thin boy at a window, a strange sound at night, and chose not to act. Because the truth is, monsters don't always hide in shadows. Sometimes they live right next door. And sometimes the worst prisons don't have bars. They have drywall, deadbolts, and silence. As I left the rehab center, I looked back one last time. Jacob was standing near the window, watching the trees. The glass was triple-paned, sealed, but the light still got through. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. But he didn't look away either.